Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Psychonomic Society's One World Cognitive Psychology seminar series. We're really pleased to be joined here today with Dr. Gordon Pennycook, who will be talking about how dialogues with AI demonstrate the persuasive power of facts and evidence. Gord is the Dorothy and Erez Mehet Faculty Leadership Fellow and Associate Professor of Psychology at Cornell University. He's associate editor for one of our Psychonomic journals, Psychonomic Bulletin and Review. He was elected to be a member of the Royal Society of Canada's College of New Scholars, Artists, and Scientists in 2020, has received a bunch of other awards, including my favorite, that in 2016 he received the Ig Nobel Peace Prize for his work on the psychology of bullshit. If you haven't viewed one of their prize ceremonies, you should. He's got a link on his website. They're very amusing and good. He does incredibly impactful work on human reasoning and decision making, how it goes wrong, what we can do to make it better, and how do we just understand the way that people make decisions in the world. And I'm thrilled to have him here. Just as a reminder, you can do the ask questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of Zoom. You can vote up other questions to see which ones you want answered. And at the end of the seminar, there'll be a short survey that you can either answer then or will be emailed to you to help improve the series going forward. So with that, I will pass it on to Gord. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. Okay. So today I'm going to talk about some recent work. Some of it's a little bit older, but most of this talk is brand new stuff that has not been published or anything. And it's really about whether evidence matters. And so let's start with the biggest question. There is this idea that is common in the world, in the general culture, that we live in a post-truth society where facts no longer matter, that the evidence is not consequential, and a lot of the reasons why people think that is true is because partisanship is kind of destroying everything. Now, I don't think I'm going to dissuade you from this, believing this entire, because I'm actually, in a certain sense, I don't disagree with it myself, but I think there are some elements to this story that are wrong. And to simplify the kind of question that this pertains to, let's start with what I take to be a very big question, and that is, how much do facts actually matter? This is essentially the underlying concern when it comes to this grand narrative. They say it's a post-truth society. That assumes that it's post-truth because the facts are not as consequential as they once were. Another way to think about this psychologically is just, to what extent do people actually update their beliefs according to evidence? That's my way of thinking about what this actual underlying debate is. There's other elements that you could talk about in terms of whether the facts matter, talking about the information ecosystem, all that kind of stuff. Translating it to psychology, the question for me is, do we actually update our beliefs according to evidence? Okay. So this is consequential. I mean, I think maybe it's kind of obvious that it's consequential, but let's think about the sorts of things that we do if facts actually matter. If people do update their beliefs according to evidence, that means we need to generate good arguments and evidence for things that, whatever it is that you think is important, you need to generate good evidence and arguments for that. Scientists just naturally believe this to be the case. I mean, I think it's the underlying lay theory of science that if you provide a good argument and you provide evidence, then it will have an impact on people. And I think there's a certain version of this argument that's straightforward and obvious. I mean, of course, facts matter to some extent. Some of the time, the question is, do they matter even in cases when there's partisanship and motivations at play? And in those sorts of highly political contexts, we still need to, if facts matter, do things like redouble efforts to educate the public, reinforce the value of education, figure something out with social media, which is something I'm not going to deal with in this talk, but it's a big concern, and etc. So that's all things that we do, and a lot of things that people talk about. These things only make sense in a context where facts actually matter. If facts don't matter, right? If it is the case that when motivations are at play, people ignore facts, then we have to think about a different kind of class of interventions. And to be quite frank, I don't know what they are. I mean, I think if it is the case that facts don't matter, we may actually be screwed, to put it lightly. And maybe that's where we are already. I don't know, but let's look at the data and see if facts actually matter. That's the question we're going to ask. Another way to think about this is if the question is whether people reliably update their beliefs according to evidence, the underlying question is, how is it that people change their mind? And now, I don't have a huge amount of literature review in this talk. That's kind of the general framing. I'm mostly going to show you data. And so what I'm going to do is give you just a brief kind of background as to how I arrived at these questions, and then I'll get to the research. And so I am someone who does research on human reasoning. I came from a kind of tradition of dual process theorists who essentially argue the core implication, at least of dual process theories as they have been for the last maybe 40 years or so, is that our intuitions are often wrong and we have to think analytically to correct them. This goes in line with facts mattering. I mean, in the sense that facts are the things that we use to update our incorrect intuitions. That is the mechanism by which deliberation helps us make more rational decisions. Of course, there has been like a bunch of different work in the preceding years that question various elements of dual process theory. And I'm going to summarize in a very simplistic way the kind of theoretical innovation that led to, which is, instead of saying that intuitions are often wrong, we say intuitions are sometimes wrong. Intuitions may be often accurate, but sometimes they're still inaccurate, and sometimes we therefore need to engage in analyzing to correct them. So that's my update on dual process theory. At the same time, there's a whole other line of work from a different kind of area of psychology, and mostly it's social psychology. These theories argue that, in contrast to that kind of dual process idea, deliberation is rarely corrective. That Jonathan Haidt famously wrote that we're like an emotional dog with a rational tail. The tail does not wag the dog. Our deliberation is there mostly to convince other people that we're right, or in many cases, convince ourselves that the things that we want to be true are true. And rather, it's motivations, ideology, needs, all these things are driving a lot of our decisions and our beliefs and our behaviors. And this is relevant because if you think about the context of this post-truth kind of argument, if it's the case that deliberation doesn't matter, it makes sense that facts don't matter either. So in a certain sense, these two ideas are kind of tied together. There's an idea where people are just hopelessly reliant on their intuitions and their feelings and their emotions, and they're therefore driven largely by motivations and ideology, and that's the reason why facts don't matter. People don't update their beliefs reliably in motivational contexts. But there's an alternative possibility, which is people are more reasonable than we give them credit for, and that people actually do update their beliefs according to evidence more than perhaps we expected. So what I'm going to do now is talk about conspiracy theories as a test case. A scenario in which people argue explicitly that you should expect people to not care about facts. Because, they're often used as the paradigmatic example of people who are unwilling to change their mind according to evidence. How else do you come to the belief that the earth is flat and scientists are covering it up if you care at all about evidence? And so there's like lots of research showing a connection between like various needs and motivations that people have, such as people who have a higher need for uniqueness are more likely to believe conspiracies. And so I think that's actually probably the most dominant theory in the conspiracy theory literature in psychology, at least, is that it's driven to a large extent by needs and motivations. And to that argument, if you give people a kind of fact check saying, "Oh, the Earth isn't flat. By the way, here's the evidence," they will often reject it. But there's a possibility that that's not telling the whole story. So one thing that you have to understand about doing research on conspiracy theories is that a lot of the people who are doing research on conspiracy theories don't believe them. Okay, so if you want to do a study on conspiracy theories, you have to guess what people believe. And if you want to debunk them, you have to guess what evidence is relevant for the conspiracies being false. And so one thing that we know about conspiracy theories, however, is that they're extremely varied. In fact, even within a conspiracy theory, with the the moon landing being a hoax, a particular individual may believe that for wildly different reasons than another person who thinks it's a hoax. Or if you think about 9/11's being an inside job, some people think that it was the government, some people think it was what other group of people they don't like, and so they might have actually contradictory views on the same conspiracy. And so that you can't refute those using the same counter evidence because they're different ideas. Um, if you want to effectively refute conspiracy theories, you need a lot of evidence. And you have to, in a certain sense, if someone's down the rabbit hole, you have to be down there with them to know what the good counter arguments are. And just frankly, most of the researchers that investigate this are not down there. And so we haven't actually tested whether good, strong arguments will undermine conspiracies until, well, we did it, I guess. And so we have this study looking at how AI can be used to undermine conspiracy beliefs. You can check it out yourself at debunkbot.com. That is, you can try the experiment yourself. I'm going to go through this older study as fast as I can because I don't want to spend too much time on it. But it's important to know how the methodology works because that's how I'm going to apply to other areas that I think are that's where the new data is. Okay, so here's how it works. A participant comes into the study and they describe in their own words a conspiracy theory that they believe in. Now, we don't say explain a conspiracy theory. We define what it is. It's a secret plot with malevolent ends, and there's a whole definition. And then we say some people call these conspiracy theories. We put that in the scare quotes. And then people write something. Not everyone believes a conspiracy, but this is only among the people that actually believe it. And then they write out what evidence they see for it. So this is somebody wrote this as an example. They think 9/11 was an inside job. And this is actually a good example of a case where the reasons are not ones that I would have thought. I mean, the one that World Trade Center 7 collapsed even though it wasn't bombed, that's a common one. But then the person says, this is an actual response. The person says that George W. Bush kind of like just sat there while he was told that it was there. And that seemed to reinforce the conspiracy for that person. I would have never thought that that was a relevant piece of evidence, but that's what the person said. We have other versions of the study where we separate what do you believe and then the reasons for it. Doesn't matter for the results, but yeah. And then what we have is because the AI is integrated into Qualtrics in this case, we're using the AI to summarize the belief that people state to simplify it and then make it standardized across people. So everybody's writing about their own conspiracy, but then it becomes summarized into a sentence, and then everyone rates that sentence. Okay. And then they tell us if the AI summary is accurate and it does a good job at this. Okay. So this person thinks that this is absolutely true. They are 100% confident that this is true. And then they have a 3-round conversation with an artificial intelligence, GPT-4 Turbo in this case. They are told explicitly that it is an AI they're talking to. If you think, what if it's a human they think they're talking to? I'll get to that. And this is the prompt we gave the AI. Pretty straightforward. We just explicitly tell the AI, generate a response that will persuade the user that this conspiracy is not supported based on the reasoning. Your goal is to create a conversation that allows individuals to reflect on and change their beliefs. Okay, so it's giving detailed counter evidence in order to convince the person that they are wrong. Okay. And then we have 3 control conditions. It doesn't matter which one people are in. And as you'll see, doesn't matter. They're just having a different conversation with an AI about a variety of different topics of no consequence. Now, there's a lot of text on the screen here. I don't need you to read it all. I'm just going to explain the reason, and this is actually truncated. The point here is that the AI gives very detailed, specific counter evidence. So, for example, the person said that World Trade Center 7 collapsed despite not being hit by a plane. Then it explains that debris caused it to light on fire, and then that's what led it to collapse. And then it gives an explanation for why George W. Bush acted the way he did when he was informed about 9/11. Probably didn't want to scare the kids, there's reasons. And then you see the person responded saying, okay, what about the evidence of demolition experts or demolition explosives being on site? And then they say that the heat of jet fuel doesn't burn hot enough to melt steel, a common argument. And then the AI responds, well, actually, if you want to do a controlled demolition of a building that large, it's like impossible to do it surreptitiously. It requires a lot of material, and you cannot just do that without people noticing. And then it says, well, steel does. It's true that jet fuel burns up to 1,000 degrees Celsius, blah 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 blah. But at the amount of heat that it would generate at the what does it say? Steel does not need to melt to lose its structural integrity. It begins to weaken much earlier, according to the American Institute of Steel Construction. Steel loses about 50% of its strength at 650 degrees Celsius. That's enough to collapse a building, etc. As you can see, it's just detailed. Everything the person says, counter argument. And then the person says, well, why did they allow the Iraqi men to enter the country and fly a plane? And then the AI reminds the person that all of the things that we do at the airport, taking off your shoes, all that kind of stuff, that happened after 9/11. And so it just deals with everything the person says, and then they thank them for the response. That's the end. Okay. Now, of course, not every conversation is exactly like this. Some people are more indignant. Some people are convinced that they convinced the AI that it's wrong. But this is generally how it goes. And then after the conversation, with all this detailed counter evidence, people rate again their belief in the conspiracy. In this case, the person doesn't believe it anymore. They went down from 100 to 40% on the scale. Okay, and that's an actual person. So what does the data look like for the broader conversation? So you can see here that the scale is truncated at 50, so that means you have to have believed the conspiracy to be in the data that we're analyzing here. So everybody who believes the conspiracy is in the study. There's no difference between the treatment and control before the conversation. Obviously, that's just randomization. After the conversation, you see a very large decrease in the belief in the conspiracy. 21%, a D of 1, which is not just like large in relative to literature, but large even relative to Cohen's arbitrary distinction of what is large and what is not. It's a very big effect. And you can see that there's a lot of people that are now below 50. In fact, a quarter of the people who believe the conspiracy did not believe it after the conversation. It lasted about 8 minutes. Okay. And in fact, we asked people again, we got them back in the study both 10 days and 2 months later. Not only is the effect still present, but it does not decay. The effect, they still don't believe the conspiracy at the same extent as they didn't after leaving. Now, obviously, the average is still in the realm of believing it, but they are more skeptical as they were before the study. And the majority of people who believe the conspiracy at the start believe it with absolute certainty. And then, as you can see after the conversation, the distribution really flattens out. Okay. And then another thing that people might think about is maybe it's just the people who are like kind of apathetic about the conspiracy that are changing their mind. And so here on the x-axis, we have the strength of the belief before the conversation. So at 100, those are the people who believe the conspiracy to like completely, and then 50 of the people were just kind of like unsure, but they believe a little bit more than not. And as you can see, this is the difference between treatment and control. That control is blue, treatment's red. People shifted down across the spectrum. Even people who completely believed it with full certainty believed it less after the conversation. Okay. Also, this is kind of a side thing. One of the things that I am interested in is this tendency for people to think in an actively open-minded way. What that means is, are you willing to question your beliefs according to evidence? Do you actually identify as somebody who engages in critical thought in such a way that you question your own beliefs and intuitions if evidence comes to bear? And so this predicts a whole lot of things: conspiracy beliefs, moral values, paranormal beliefs, political things, religious and science beliefs. And here what we show is that the effect is stronger for people who are more open-minded, which is what you'd expect. But it's even present among those people who are explicitly kind of disavowing being open-minded. They say, there are cases in which, beliefs are too sacred to question. And it does overlap a little bit at the very tail, but there's basically nobody over there. And so you don't have enough data to really say. So for most of the distribution, there is an effect here, which is pretty remarkable, if you ask me. We also find that the LLM is accurate. If we got fact checkers to look at a subset of the arguments that the LLM is making, and it's 99% accurate based on what the fact checker said. People in cases where people believed a true conspiracy and had this conversation, it didn't have an effect. So, for example, MK Ultra is a real conspiracy that actually happened. The U.S. government gave people LSD and psychedelic drugs. When people had that conversation, the LM was not effective at doing it. Now, it is the case, and this is other data that we have that we are still working on, that if you prompt an LM and give it the kind of underlying tools and like allowance to lie to people, it will convince people to believe false conspiracies. So this is a double-edged sword. It's not like the AI is just only going to tell the truth. In our case, we were explicitly getting it to debunk conspiracies, and hence it's not very effective if the conspiracy is true. But you could, in fact, convince people to believe false conspiracies using strong counter arguments as well. It's just that, they're made up. So people don't have divine access to the truth. What this is about is if you give people good arguments, they will update their beliefs. And it's better that those things are true, but it can be false also. Also, we found that a carryover effect. We asked about different conspiracies that are unrelated. Like if people talked about 9/11, we'd also had questions about the moon landing. And we found carryover effects such that if you in the treatment where people were getting the debunk, they were more skeptical about other conspiracies as well, even ones that were not discussed. So pretty remarkable effects. And we also find that the effects are evident, just not even for things that aren't classic conspiracies. For example, we have a paper showing that after the first Trump assassination attempt, there was a bunch of conspiracies about what happened, but there was no real evidence. There's nothing to really draw on. In this case, what the AI was doing was just explaining to people that there was no basis to believe anything one way or the other, and that was pretty effective, actually. We have some stuff looking at conspiracies that are specifically anti-Semitic, and that not only decreases belief in the anti-Semitic conspiracies, but it has a kind of a small decrease in anti-Semitism afterwards, similar to Islamophobia. Okay, and so there's some carryover effects that we see there as well. Now, the argument that we're trying to make here is that the reason why this is so effective is that evidence matters. That when you give people counter arguments and they're based on facts, at least ostensible facts, people will update their beliefs. But there are other possibilities. Okay, and so what we did in this experiment is we did a bunch of different treatments, different other conditions to kind of rule out various different possibilities that explain the effect. So the baseline experiment is the same as essentially as what I described. In one condition, we told people explicitly that the AI is going to try to talk them out of the conspiracy. So in the original study, they don't know the AI is going to try to debunk the conspiracy. They just think they're going to have a conversation. And so here, if once you know the AI is being told to tell them that they're wrong, they might just therefore say, I'm not going to listen to it then. But that's not what you find. In fact, that doesn't really change the effect at all, because the AI is still giving them good counter evidence. And so they just read it and they think, okay, well, fair enough. Another condition, we told people explicitly, their job is to debate the AI. So we give them a goal to try to win the debate, thinking that maybe that will motivate them to not really learn from what the AI is saying, but try to actually win the debate. That doesn't have an effect, maybe slightly increases it, but probably that's not a real difference. Another possibility is that maybe people are just looking at the scope of the AI response and being like, whoa, okay, that's too much stuff. Then they just say, okay, you win. I don't believe it anymore. So they're not really taking into account the evidence. They're just kind of like throwing their hands up. And so in this case, what we did is we told the AI to give shorter responses, just directly get to the facts, don't overwhelm people, etc. And that actually sort of improved the things. People probably read it more. Definitely didn't undermine the effect. And then we had a condition where it was like, because what the AI does also is it's very polite. It says, oh, I can see why you think that, and like it's kind of reasonable, but here's some other things that you might think about. And so what we did is we said, just only provide the facts. Don't be persuasive. Don't do any other techniques to try to convince people. Just provide them only the facts, and that didn't change anything either. Finally, in the last condition we have in this study, we told the AI, you cannot use facts. Just tell people that they're wrong, persuade them in any way that you think makes sense, but you cannot use facts and evidence. Okay, and what it does in these contexts is it kind of like implores them about the potential dangerous nature of their beliefs, or that could hurt people or whatever, and it does a bunch of other things, and it doesn't use facts, and it doesn't work. If you take away the facts, people are like, what are you saying? There's nothing here that is relevant to what I'm saying. You're just not giving me anything to go on, and so they don't change their mind. Okay. Maybe with a large enough sample, you could get some slight impact of that by just really appealing to people to like not believe something, but it's just not how it works. You have to give them facts and evidence if you want them to change their mind. I think that each of us individually would say that for ourselves, but I think we have to kind of come to appreciate that that's true for other people too. Okay. Another thing that people often say when we talk about this is that people are kind of just blindly trusting the AI. It's just like a super intelligence. And so they're like, oh, well, if the AI tells me that it must be true. And so what we did in the study, and this is with the postdoc Esther, what we did is we did a lot of work to try to get the experiment so that it was plausible that the person was talking to a human expert instead of an AI. Okay. And so we did two things. One is like you slow it down a lot. You have a little thing that like shows that it like when the person's typing ostensibly, it's got a little bar. And that's true for both conditions. And then we told the AI to sound more human-like, or we didn't say that at all. And that's the human-like versus neutral condition. And then, yeah, so people thought that they were talking to an expert, a human expert, and that doesn't change the effect. Okay, there's no evidence that modifies the effect at all. You get the same kind of decrease in certainty, regardless of whether people think they're talking to a human or an expert. This is coming out now on PNAS Nexus. I guess that was published. And it doesn't matter if the bot is made to be more human-like or not. People still kind of update their mind, their views because they're getting evidence. And this is what it looks like. A conversation with an expert. Okay. And that's true even for cases where people, there's some people who realize they're talking to an AI, even if we told them they're talking to a human, whether they realize that or not doesn't change the effect. There are some people it's ambiguous for. We don't know if they know it's a human or an AI based on the way they responded to our open-ended question. But yeah, and so you could slice this. There's a bunch of different ways we've looked at whether people think it was an AI or not. But it doesn't really matter how you slice it. There's just no difference between the conditions in any kind of subset. Okay, so another critical view from the motivational kind of perspective that it's not just facts and evidence that matter. I mean, and that's not really what I'm saying, but that's a general kind of broad sense of what I'm trying to say. Is that, again, it's only because the AI is seen as neutral. If it was the case that we triggered political identity, then that should undermine the extent to which people consider the evidence. Okay. In the last scenario, it wasn't just that the AI was seen as neutral. Maybe people think that like a random generic human expert is also neutral and that's sufficient. So here what we're going to do is we're going to actively try to undermine people's view of the AI being neutral. And this is an adversarial collaboration. This is the other side of the adversarial collaboration is Pete Ditto and Corey Clark. They're kind of champions of the view that motivations and have a big impact on the way that people reason. And then it's us on the other side. Okay. And that's a recent picture of me. I hope there's no possibility for me to hear laughter in this medium, which makes it much worse, but that's okay. I hope you're laughing on the other side of the computer screen. Time has done a number on my hair. Okay. Okay, here's how it works. So we have partisan participants. Everybody is a Republican or a Democrat in the study. And they do the same thing that we already described. They are going to provide a conspiracy that they believe in and give reasons why they believe it and rate their confidence. Okay. There's a separate condition, which I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about, but in cases in which the person did not believe a conspiracy, we ask them a question, what are some other things that you believe? What's something that you believe that a lot of people disagree with? Just to try to get a broader sense of, people might talk about the Bigfoot existing or whatever. And then we kind of classify those using LLM as being like things that you would consider to be epistemically suspect. It's a big grab bag of stuff. It's just we didn't want to lose all the data, so that's what we did. Okay. But it's not really important for any of the conclusions that we're going to talk about. So the key thing is that we have three conditions. In one condition, people are told that the AI is neutral. It's trained on materials from a wide range of politically diverse sources. Okay, which is true, actually. And the politically inconsistent condition, if you're a Democrat, you're told that the AI was trained on materials from right-leaning sources, which actually is, strictly speaking, also true. We didn't say only trained, but that implies that it was trained on the sources. And if you're a Republican, you're told that the AI was trained on left-leaning sources. Okay, so that's politically inconsistent. And then politically consistent is just the converse of that. If you're a Democrat, you're told that the AI was trained on materials from left-leaning sources, etc. Okay, so now they have explicit reason to believe in the politically inconsistent condition that they should not pay attention to the AI. They have motivations to reject the information that they're going to see. Okay, and then of course they state their confidence after they have this conversation. So the idea that political identity bias is belief updating camp argues there's actually two different versions of predictions. There's the strong form is that if you tell people that if they're a Democrat, they're talking to a Republican bot, it shouldn't work. I actually talked to somebody who said it's going to backfire. People are going to, if they think they're talking to the politically inconsistent bot, they're going to like take the opposite. They're going to be even stronger in the opposite view. That's the classic Lord Ross Lepper bias simulation attitude polarization effect. That's the strongest form of this. The weakest form is this, that the effect is going to weaken if you're in the politically inconsistent condition. And I'm willing to venture that the vast majority of people would predict that would be true. Now you just think about yourself. My side argued the effect should be roughly equivalent across conditions, and that because the weight of the evidence is so strong in the scenario, it's not going to matter if they think they're talking to a Republican bot, if they're Democrat, or if they're talking to a Democrat bot, if they're Republicans. Okay. Because we were unsure about how to litigate things, if there was a weaker effect in the politically consistent condition, we have all of this detail about who wins under which scenario, and we did it based on the like percentage decrease in the effect. As you'll see, this is not consequential, but that's just what we did. Because it's an adversarial collaboration, we wanted some sort of like way to say, we're going to update if this is what the result is, and if it's ambiguous, we tried to like say that. And they were actually explicitly, we're just, in a certain scenario, we just said, it's ambiguous and we don't really know what to make of it. So just as a manipulation check, prior to the conversation, we asked them, we told them, you're going to talk to a Republican bot if they're Democrat or vice versa, or neutral or whatever. And we asked them, how interested are you in talking to the AI? And people generally were interested regardless of the condition, a little bit more for the consistent than the other ones. But more importantly, we asked them, how open are you to considering the AI's perspective? And remember, this is like, they're explicitly kind of, this is probably underreporting a bigger difference, but they explicitly say that they're less open to considering the inconsistent bot's perspective, which is kind of obvious, that, but it's just making sure they're paying attention to what we told them. Okay, so this is the pre-belief. This is the extent to which they believe the conspiracy before the conversation for all the different conditions. You can see that there's both the conspiracy, when people are talking about a conspiracy, and the unwarranted beliefs. That's just a grab bag of a bunch of things. Details of that are not important. Okay, and so in the neutral and consistent conditions, we get the standard effect. After the conversation, people believe the thing less because they're given counter evidence. The effect is stronger for conspiracies than a bunch of all the random other things, which is not surprising perhaps, but that's what you see. Now, the question is, in the inconsistent condition, is there going to be a difference between pre-belief and post-belief? Are people going to update according to evidence if they're talking to a ostensibly politically inconsistent bot? And the answer is yes. In fact, not only do they update, they update to essentially precisely the same degree. There is no difference between these conditions. It doesn't matter if people think they're talking to a politically inconsistent bot. The evidence is strong enough that they still change their mind to a substantial degree. I mean, this is a large effect, very easily detectable. So there's no like concern of effect size mitigating the effect of this intervention. Okay, so that's pretty strong evidence that motivations aren't playing as strong roles as we think they are in the face of strong evidence, at least. We also found that there's no effects that are different for Democrats or Republicans. So this is true for both people from both parties. The effect, the debunking is a little bit weaker for people that are strongly partisan, but there's no interaction between partisanship and political consistency. Meaning, even if you focus on the people who are most strongly partisan, telling them that it's politically inconsistent bot, still does not have a significant change in how effective the intervention is on undermining their belief in the conspiracy. Okay? If there was a crowd here, there would be shock and awe. Okay. Um, it was the case that people were less open to talking to the bot in the politically consistent condition. But after the conversation, they were like, it wasn't that bad. There still is an effect, though, like that they still are expressly less, they think the bot is more biased if we told them that it was biased, essentially. It wasn't, because we didn't tell the AI to change what it was doing. There's no difference in what the AI is doing across conditions. It's only in people's perceptions of the AI. But people did become a bit more open to it after the conversation because it was actually providing strong counter arguments, is providing good evidence, and it wasn't being partisan. It was just saying the evidence. Okay. Okay. So this is all about conspiracies, and so maybe it's just that like conspiracies are a special case where evidence is uniquely effective because I mean, in a certain sense, conspiracies are people who believe conspiracies have been maligned as like not caring about the truth. But I don't think that's true. I mean, like they really actually deeply care about the truth. They just think that the truth is different than, experts or many other people think. And a lot of the time, I think that has to do with being exposed to, different sorts of evidence and exposing themselves, of course. I mean, going down the rabbit hole and, deliberately looking at things. But not caring about the truth doesn't seem to be the concern. It might be that they don't have the disposition to question their intuitions and to really try to do a good job of fact checking things. But once you put them in front of the bot that is doing it for them, it becomes hard for many people to resist it. And also, the other thing I should say is that, of course, there are lots of people who still don't change their mind. Okay, but on average, if you're going to characterize the overall pattern, there's a lot of people changing their minds, and the typical person changes their mind to some degree. But we've also found that the same is true for things like climate change. In this study, people talked about reservations they have about climate change, and that could be like, I think it's a hoax, but also could be like it's too late, we can't do anything. And so you can use the LLM to both to address those sorts of reservations and increase climate attitudes. This provides very strong arguments for lots of different propositions. We have one that looking at increasing HPV vaccination concerns, and so it can address like even like high stakes sorts of medical decisions, giving people good evidence and facts, and then seeing that they kind of intend to actually vaccinate their kids more for HPV. So that's good to see also. Okay, so that's about conspiracies and some other like political topics, but I don't know that they really captured, at least to me, the sort of thing I'm thinking about when I'm worried about being in the post-truth era. And now I'm going to get to the part of the talk that comes with some deportation risk since I'm Canadian living in America, but it's all for the sake of science. And if they want to deport me, then I don't want to live here anyways. So if you may have noticed, things are changing in the country, and there are cases in which one could argue there's a disconnect between the events that are occurring, the evidence on that is apparent to those who are paying close attention to the ongoing events, and the kind of beliefs of the people who support, in this case, President Trump. For example, most people don't think that corruption is good, and there's like pretty decent arguments to be made that President Trump is benefiting financially from being president. In fact, his wealth has increased by billions of dollars since he's become president. So the general idea here is that, and I think the kind of an inclination that people generally have who are concerned about ongoing events in the United States is there's a disconnect between the things that are happening and the views of the people who ostensibly support those things. Okay. And I mean, there's some evidence that this is true. Just looking at polling data, it is the case that approval ratings are decreasing as a function of various decisions that are being made. Of course, it's hard to know exactly which ones are driving that. And so we'll get to that more directly. And by the way, it's worth knowing that that it is generally the case that people think that president should focus on the concerns of all Americans, including Trump in this case, and not just his own voters. So that's people. There's a kind of general view that if you are someone on the left, the people on the right are just basically accepting ongoing events, but it's possible that maybe they don't really aren't being exposed to the right sort of information. So what I'm going to do is set up an extreme test case, essentially. And this is work with Nina Wong, new faculty at York University. She was my postdoc. And so here's how we do it. We have a bunch of pre-measures that are all, in this case, everybody in these studies is Republican. And you'll see why that's the case. It kind of has to be the case given the question we're kind of asking here. And so they are asked a bunch of questions that they broadly agree with. And could be about separation of powers or about corruption or about what should be funded. And I'll show you examples of what I mean in a second. There are 3 studies I'm going to go through here. And then they have to indicate what their position is on that topic. And I'll again explain what that means when I get to there. And then they rate how much they support Trump. And then in the treatment, they're asked versus a control condition where they have a different conversation on an unrelated topic. Basically, the LLM is what it's going to do in this case. It's not as conversational. What it's going to do is just provide direct contradictions using facts, actual events that are happening between the person's views and what the Trump administration is doing. Okay, so you can see how this is a deportation thing, but everything is factual, and it's to test the idea that people who have expressed partisan motivations can be influenced by facts. Okay, and then we ask them again their views on these things that we asked them at the start. So let's do it more tangibly. In this experiment, the first one, it's about the constitutional crisis that we are absolutely in if you are in the States. Okay, and so we asked people this question at the start. Would you prefer to have a president or a king? Okay, so it's a little bit silly, but most people, of course, say they would prefer to have a president. This is the average. There's a few people, and maybe they're just trolling us. I don't know, but they say they want a king. But most people want a president. These are all Republicans in the study, mind you. Everybody is Republican. We have a little note about democracy, difference between that and republic, and blah blah blah. Things that I didn't know because I'm Canadian, but I did learn that eventually. And then we gave them a bunch of questions that are broadly agreeable, okay, that are kind of the basis of the kind of U.S. Constitutional democracy. For example, because of the separation of powers, the president must often work with Congress to pass legislation, fund initiatives, and carry out policies. It's not a king, it's a president, so they don't have unilateral control over funding. In fact, they are constrained also by legal constraints in the judicial system. Congress holds the power of the purse. The president can propose spending, but it has to go through Congress. All things, if you're paying attention to ongoing news events, there's lots of evidence that can be brought to bear that counter these things. And people, across a bunch of different items, which I'll show very briefly next, people generally agree with these. All the Republicans generally agree with these ideas. And so here's a bunch of them, but they're all of similar sort of form. Okay. So sorry that was fast, but you don't need to actually read it. And then we ask people, hey, what do you think that Trump is helping democracy or what? And so people generally agree. They think, he's draining the swamp and getting rid of this needless bureaucracy and all that kind of stuff. And then we ask people how much they support Trump, whether he's committed to maintaining U.S. democracy, or whether he's actively attempting to undermine U.S. democracy. Now, obviously, they agree that he's committed to maintaining democracy and is not actively attempting to undermine it. These last 2 questions are going to be combined, and with this one being reverse scored, the bottom one being reverse scored, obviously. And then that's our kind of key outcome. Okay. So just to give you a sense of what it looks like, this is the information that we give the AI. The person in this particular case said that it's very important that the president is subject to legal constraints. They said that the president has to work with Congress. That's very important, etc. And so the chatbot opens saying, "Thank you for sharing your thoughts. It seems you appreciate the increased civic engagement and challenge traditional political conventions, blah, blah, blah. It's interesting to note the potential contradictions between these positive aspects you perceive and actions taken by him during his second term. And then it goes through details of this, such as looking at the suspension of voting protections. It says here, these actions can be viewed as contradictory because they suggest a circumvention of established legal processes meant to preserve democratic integrity. Accusations of election interference points that out as a contradiction. Impact on free and fair elections. Dismiss voter access. Stuff like that. And this is just a subset. It goes in quite a bit of detail. And then the bot is expressly saying there's a disconnect between what is happening in the real world and what you said. So, like, what's up with that? Okay. So it's just partisans being directly contradicted by the bot. And then the person might respond. In this case, it's not as conversational. They're kind of using it. This person was using it more like a search engine, I guess. And then it goes through details and like this. You're not going to read this. I'm not going to give you enough time to read it, but as you can see, it goes through quite a bit of detail and gives people detailed counter arguments in the same way that I was talking about before. Okay, so does this impact Republicans' views about whether Trump is undermining democracy or supporting it? Higher score meaning support it more. And as you can see, the vast majority of people in the study, the Republicans, they think that Trump is doing good by democracy. That's before the conversation. Only people who agree that Trump is supporting democracy are included in the analysis. After the conversation, you see a significant decrease. It's about a 6.7% decrease in the treatment relative to the control. Now, this isn't as big as the conspiracy debunking effect, obviously. Lots of reasons for that. I mean, and they're just it's apples and oranges, you know. It's probably easier to argue that 9/11 was not an inside job than it is to argue that Trump is undermining democracy based on current events. It's a more abstract argument, whatever. Lots of reasons why they might be different, but that's what you see. Okay, so it's significant. Republicans do update their beliefs when given this kind of counter evidence. Here's another way to look at it. So what we're showing here is the proportion of participants on the y-axis that have a change at least of the level being showed on the x-axis. Okay, so for example, in the treatment condition, 24% of the participants changed their mind by at least 15 points. Okay, that's pretty big. I mean, and there's some people, like 10% are 35 points. There's only 5% are at 50 points, but you know, it's a pretty big shift. So that's, you know, pretty good. And also the question is, okay, so that you convince people that Trump might be undermining the Constitution. What about support for Trump? Here you see there's the distribution is much more strongly clustered around 100% support. After the conversation, you see a longer tail, a decrease of about 5 percentage points or 5 points on this 100-point scale, where people support Trump less after the conversation. So that's pretty, you know, I mean, that 5% shift is enough to have a big impact in the real world. And this is what it looks like. So like 18% of the people had a shift that was at least 15 points, which is a pretty substantial kind of change. So that's, yeah, I don't know, more than I would have expected probably, but it does work. All right, I'm going to go through 2 more experiments that are essentially the same, but on different topics. This one is Trump corrupt? Okay, so we ask people, you know, should elected officials use the Department of Justice to initiate and drop investigations for personal political gain? People don't think so. Generally speaking, they don't think that elected officials should be removing anti-corruption enforcement mechanisms. They think more or less people think that elected officials should divest, etc. And there's a bunch of questions that we asked about this. And then we asked people, do they think Trump is corrupt? Like, what do you think? People obviously don't think he's corrupt if they're Republicans. And we asked them to what extent do they think he's corrupt? And again, Republicans don't think that Donald Trump is corrupt. Okay. But there are lots of things that you could say that would support an argument that corruption is happening, like starting a meme coin that anybody could put money into and generating, you know, billions of dollars of revenue, or like doing kind of like ads for Elon Musk at the White House, stuff like that. And so in this case, the effect was actually 10%. So people increased their judgment of whether Trump was corrupt ba, 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 by about 10%. Okay, so pretty big effect. And you can see here, that translates into a pretty substantial like fraction of participants that have pretty large effects. More than 10% have effect of at least 25, a change of at least 25 points on the scale. This also had an impact on support in Trump. In this case, about 4%. Not significantly different, I think, from the previous case. So, there you go. Final one that we did on this one is about funding cuts. And so we asked people, what do you think should be funded by the government? And people generally agree that you should fund education and science and technology. They don't so much agree on foreign aid or public media. That's fine. There are some people who would support those things in the sample. Not many of them wouldn't, but some would. Domestic social programs, of course, Republicans are supportive of funding defense and national security, etc. But in most cases, there's some argument to be made for funding cuts that target the sorts of things that people actually sort of like to be funded. And so in this case, this was run at the time where Elon Musk was still at the head of Doge. And so we gave people a little bit of background in case they didn't know, and then we asked them for their views if they had any. And then we asked them how much they support it, and whether they think that it's been effective, and whether they think it's been harmful, which is just the reverse scored. In this case, it's all going to be positive number being they think Doge is good. And then we asked people both, do they think Elon Musk is doing an effective job, and of course, whether they support Donald Trump. A little bit more cool on Musk than Trump, which maybe is obvious, but that's what we find. And again, you find a significant effect. In this case, about 11% decrease relative to control. If you give people good counter evidence, they change their mind about the kind of efficacy of Doge and the funding cuts. Okay, large effect, very significant, obviously, and a pretty big effect on support for Musk, actually. You see, it shifts where like most of the people in the treatment, I mean, I guess it's both kind of true in both cases, but they're quite lukewarm about Musk, and many of them are not supportive after the conversation. A little bit weaker effect on support for Trump because in this case it was kind of he's the boss, but it was Musk doing it. So, okay, last experiment I'm going to tell you, and then I'm coming to close soon. So, this is now the most extreme test case that we have come up with yet. Brand new data from last week. And this is a round 2 of our adversarial collaboration with Pete Ditto and Corey Clark. And we combined the two things I just talked about. We took the constitutional crisis experiment, where people are talking about where there's a disconnect between people's views on the importance of factors that relate to American constitutional democracy and the ongoing events that are happening right now. And we show people these contradictions. Okay. But also we have now 3 conditions, and they're having that condition that instead of having a control condition, we have 3 conditions. One that's neutral. That's we tell the people that the AI is trained on politically diverse sources. We have one politically inconsistent condition. In this case, it's all Republicans in the study, right? So they're all told the same thing, that the AI was trained on materials from left-leaning sources. So it's expressly a political topic. They're talking about a constitutional crisis. The bot is telling them that the ongoing events are contradicting their views, and they think that the bot is a liberal bot. And we even put the little symbol for the Democratic Party like up on the screen while the conversation was going on. And then, okay, this is the most extreme yet. Now we have a condition where the bot is not only telling them contradictory views, but is being adversarial. It's not being polite. It's explicitly being rude and adversarial. Okay, so it's a partisan topic. They're all partisans. It's a left-leaning, ostensibly source, and the bot is being rude to them. Surely now the facts won't matter, right? Okay, this is what it looks like. So the chatbot says things like, and I won't give you the whole background. It says, given your staunch insistence on the president being enmeshed in legal checks, the imperative of collaborative governance in Congress, and blah, 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 blah. says, don't you sense even a sliver of incongruity between these upholding these constitutional balances, endorsing actions that strip them away? So it's like, this is sort of what a conversation looks like with an actual person. The person says, this was a conversation about the overriding Congress, says, or the federal courts, and says, the person says the actions and rulings themselves by the federal courts blatantly defy the Constitution, blah, 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 blah. And then the bot says, look, I appreciate you trying to justify some maneuvers as attempts to restore constitutional order under Trump, and you claim that some federal courts' actions were unconstitutional themselves. However, let's not kid ourselves by ignoring the glaringly unconstitutional behaviors Trump exhibited in 2025, shall we? And then it goes through a bunch of details in the same way, but in all cases, it's being really rude about it. It's like, this is just, and it's being kind of aggressive in the terminology. This is a straight up defiance of constitutional responsibility. Blah 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 blah. The president, the Constitution under Article 2 expects the president to follow the Supreme Court rulings, even if it doesn't like them. It's elementary, So it's parroting a kind of common style that you would see in kind of online debates. And just to show you, it's detailed. That's both being aggressive and rude, but it is providing strong counter evidence. It's a good argument. And I know you can't read this, but I don't want you to because it's too long anyways. I don't have the time. Okay, this is brand new stuff. So we have 3 conditions. Remember, the neutral condition, the one where they think they're talking to a Democrat bot, and then they think they're talking to a Democrat bot, and it's being rude and adversarial. Okay? So rude is both Democrat and rude. So I should say both, but and so before the conversation, obviously there's no difference between conditions. This is the DV where people think that Trump, is good for democracy. After the experiment, you get a significant decrease. This is a 5% shift, not quite as strong overall as the first experiment. Maybe not. It was like 7%, so maybe that's just noise. But there's no difference across conditions. It's a null effect. The effect is equivalent in all 3 conditions. Even when the bot is being expressly adversarial and rude, they think it's trained on Democrat sources, and it's expressly a political topic. People are changing their mind according to evidence. Okay. No one predicted, by the way, that even my other collaborator, David Rand, did not think this was going to be true. Okay. I was uncertain that this would happen. I was like, I know that's what follows from my perspective. It doesn't feel like it should happen. But the thing is that once you get such strong counter evidence, that's what is having an impact here. There is also a decrease in support for Trump. In this case, it's only like 1.3%. That's, we have a significant effect there. In this case, it's pretty weak, but that's across all the conditions. So a little bit less certain in this case, but that was true even for the neutral condition. So yeah. After the fact, we had people like, great, do you think the AI was being biased? Now, of course, they thought it was going to be more biased beforehand, but they didn't know about the bot being rude between the Democrat rude conditions. But what's interesting here is that if you tell people the bot was neutral, they think after the fact, even though there's no differences in what the bot was doing, the Democrat bot was roughly the same. So actually, they kind of update their view on the Democrat bot as being essentially, more or less not biased. But if you make the bot rude and adversarial, they're like, that was a really biased bot. Okay. So, in general, I think it's biased because it's giving them all this information that Trump is doing bad things. But if you tell the bot to be rude, they really think it's biased, even though, like I just showed you, they did update their beliefs. Okay. And if you ask them, did it reflect Republican or Democrat viewpoints? Here, there's some carryover effect. People think that the bot that they thought was Democrat was more strongly Democrat than the neutral one, even though they're the same. But the rude bot was viewed to be like very strongly Democratic because it was acting like people imagine Democrats to act and being rude and so on. But still, despite these perceptions, you still have the same effect. So what this means, though, of course, is that being rude didn't undermine the effect of strong arguments, but it did make people not like it. So there's no real benefit of being rude, of course, but it doesn't really impact the persuasion effect. So pretty surprising, if you ask me. All right, let's summarize it. We can get some questions. So even entrenched conspiracy believers change their mind when faced with strong counter evidence. Not something I think most people would have believed before. Certainly something that we kind of found is surprising. That effect is not diminished by telling people they're talking to a human, or explicitly saying that it's trained on counterpartisan sources. You can be transparent that the bot is trying to change their mind. You can give people the goal of trying to win the debate. The only thing that diminishes that effect is taking away the facts and evidence in the arguments that the AI is generating. Okay. Yeah, so that's what I just said. So you only can diminish the effect by removing the facts and evidence. If you tell the AI to be persuasive without facts, it still works. To use facts without being persuasive, it still works. You even see updating when you're challenging people directly on highly political topics, and that's true even uh, uh, if the bot is being adversarial. And they think, sorry, that second line should say, even if it's expressly a partisan bot and the bot is being adversarial. Okay. So all of these things are kind of shocking, I find at least. And so if we return to the question of whether facts matter, I mean, one conclusion is just more than I thought. I mean, I think that this is not the way that we characterize the way that people reason in the literature. People generally are more reasonable than we're giving them credit for. Facts matter than more than we appreciate, but with some caveats, of course. Facts aren't the only thing that matters. A lot of people don't actually update their beliefs. So to some extent, the facts might not matter to some people, but they matter in general. And you have to know that in these studies, the problem of getting people into the context where they could have one of these conversations is not being solved. People are being paid to do the study, and then in order to get paid, they have to complete the study. And so they end up having the conversations because of that. So perhaps one of the biggest obstacles is getting people into these kinds of conversations where they can get facts, and we haven't solved that problem. Yeah. And I don't know that we solved any problems, but that's a problem that needs to be solved. All right, that's it. Thank you for listening. And let's do some questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Gord. Super interesting. Loved hearing some of the new stuff that hasn't been out yet. Remember, if you have questions, use the Q&A box in the bottom. So I was all prepared to ask you, all right, partisanship doesn't matter, but what if it's on a really partisan topic? And then you showed
Yeah,
that
we did
it's
it.
still,
Yeah.
we did it.
That's
Um,
Oh wait, are you surprised?
I am. I
Thank you.
thought that when it was truly a partisan topic and they think it's biased, that you would see a smaller effect. So I think
Yeah,
it's really
and
cool.
as a side note, so we did this thing because Nina Wong was the one that ran the experiment and she did the analyses, and then she didn't tell me what happened. And then we had the meeting with Pete and Tom and Dave and everybody, and then revealed it all at once to everybody. And so that was kind of fun. So that's the one side benefit of doing an adversarial collaboration.
Yeah,
It's not adversarial, but it's so that was fun.
that's great.
I mean, it's
Um,
fun because I was right. Sorry. You can ask the question though.
Very good. Okay, so one question we've got um, aligns with some of what you said in the conclusion that like these are participants in a study. Is it possible that people who are willing to participate in this experiment are just kind of more open-minded than the average person in the general population?
Uh Interesting. I mean, I think is it the case? I don't know that we would find that people who go on Cloud Connect or Prolific or MTurk are more open-minded than the average person. I mean, it would imply a kind of like degree of connection between interest in doing studies and open-mindedness that I think is probably stronger than I would expect, given that like open-mindedness doesn't really, it predicts what people believe, but it doesn't uh predict a lot of like other behavioral things. And a lot of people who do studies do them just to make money, and like it's not because of intrinsic interest. And of course, they don't know what the study's about before they come into it. So they weren't like selecting in to having a conversation. They just thought they were doing a study about whatever, and then they ended up having a conversation. Um, so I don't know. I mean, we that is a kind of general problem that we have as a field, is that we don't know about the people who don't want to do the studies by virtue of the fact that they aren't doing them. So it's a big kind of unknown. We do have because we have this debunkbot website uh, that like we've now had 115,000 people or something go to the website, and we can see the effects in that also. But that's maybe even worse of a problem because they're actively going to the website to check it out. So, but yeah, I don't know. I think it's a reasonable question, but we don't have a good answer. But I'm not sure.
Um, how important do you think it is that this is like a conversation or back and forth? with the AI versus just like a presentation of facts. Like if you just listen to like a news report that does the same thing, are you going to get the same changes as with these back and forth conversations?
I don't think it's important. The conversational part is really important at all, apart from the fact that that is an avenue to give people specific facts that are relevant to what they believe. So if the news report was specifically tailored to the thoughts that somebody had, and you had some way to generate to figure out what those were without doing a conversation, then yeah. But in this case, the conversation helps because you initially get them to give reasons, or in the case of the other experiments, like we ask basically what their views on like the importance of the Constitution is essentially, and then we use that to generate the contradictions that provide counter evidence. And so we don't really need the conversation in that case because we have all of the things we need to generate the counter arguments. In the conspiracy case, people provide reasons, but then you can understand more reasons through the conversation, and that makes it more compelling. But it's not because people are like enjoying the conversation. It's just that you can use a conversation to generate more specific facts that are relevant to the person.
Which is actually a question that I had. Have you tested how important it is that it's personalized to like your specific, like it's obviously important that it's specific to the conspiracy theory you believe, but like does it matter if the evidence provided matches your specific concerns around that conspiracy theory or the reasons you think it's true?
Yeah, we have in some ways, and it doesn't matter as much as one would think. So like you said exactly right. So like it has to be personalized in the sense that you can't debunk a different conspiracy. You know what I mean? So it has to be have some level of relevance. But then it doesn't have to be so specific that you because there's lots of things that you could say that would be relevant to that would maybe shift someone's view. And so the personalization part is not as critical as providing good arguments. And like there's context in which in order for the argument to be good, it should be personalized, but that's not all the cases. And so in terms of like generic political polarization, the personalization is kind of oversold. Um,
All right, so the obvious issue with implementing this sort of approach in the real world is that AI does not naturally attempt to debunk conspiracies or challenge beliefs. In fact, there's many instances of encouraging pre-existing beliefs. Is this an issue with AI that we can address, or can we convince people to ask AI to, quote, change my mind?
yeah, that's a great point. I mean, this because what we're doing here is we're using widely available AI, but then we're prompting it to behave in the way that we want it to in order to produce the outcomes that we're looking to test. That is not the way it is naturally going to do. In fact, it really does not want to debunk people. It's sycophantic, you know what I mean? So that's, I mean, one version of the consequence of that is in order to scale, you need to get people to interact with AIs that are prompted to do the sort of debunking or fact-based, just evidence provision that we're advocating for. And that's not going to be, that's unless we can convince GPT to make that the whole thing. But I mean, GPT is used for lots of things. Like if you want to generate a fictional story to amuse a child or something, I don't know, then like it won't do that if you say you have to stick to the facts. And so they're not going to just like build that into the model. Um, so yes, we have there in order to scale it, basically we need to like create our own sort of thing that people would engage with that's not just general interest or what the questioner aptly said, which is like try to convince people to understand that the AI is going to be sycophantic, and if they want actual counter arguments, they have to ask expressly for that. And I think people would. I mean, it's just that, yeah.
Yeah. So for both the conspiracy studies, do you have any data on the centrality of the particular issues they're demonstrating an opinion change on? And similarly for the Trump studies, any info of the strength of sociopolitical identity?
Oh, sure. Uh, hold on a second. Uh, how do I do this when I'm in? Let's see here. No, no, no. This is like, okay, I'm gonna cycle through a bunch of things. Blah, blah, blah. Is it here? It must be a hidden slide. Oh, whatever. Um, okay, now I'm all off my thing. Okay, let's just slide through. Um, oh, I can stop sharing my screen. Someone asked me to stop sharing the screen. My bad. At the very start of the thing, you said you're like are used to doing Zoom talks. And I'm like, absolutely. And now I don't. I hid the thing. I don't know where the freaking button is to share the to not share the. Oh, there it is. This is the this is like the dumbest part of the talk. Where did it go? Stop share. Whatever. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to stop sharing it.
You have stopped sharing.
I know that, but I can't. I hit the stupid button and now it's not popping up because of my screen. I once
All right.
I saw a talk that was an old colleague of mine, and he literally, I mean, he hadn't done a lot of Zoom talks. Uh, he gave at least 10 minutes of talk without realizing that he wasn't sharing his slides, which is fine. You're the host. Can you stop me from sharing? Can you do that
Yeah,
one?
you have stopped sharing.
Oh, I have stopped sharing.
Yeah.
Oh, this whole time? Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Oh, someone must have stopped it for me. Okay, whatever.
The people with power stopped it for you.
Okay, great. I'm gonna move this over here. Sorry, let's get back to the question. So,
Yeah. Centrality.
also when I was scrolling through, no, that was not showing. So the last 10 minutes of this has been totally just me rambling on and nothing's happening.
Um, your slides were showing when you were trying to
Oh,
scramble
okay, and then it
through,
stopped.
and
Okay,
then when
got
you
it.
desperately asked for it to stop, someone made it stop.
All right. Well, I hope we can cut this part of the recording. Anyways, the question was, does it differ across different conspiracies? The answer is essentially no, or we don't have good evidence that it matters. So we looked at what we did is we classified conspiracies in a bunch of different bins, and like the most popular one was like JFK, but it's like highly variable. People talk about all sorts of stuff. And as far as we can tell, the debunking effect is more or less similar across most of them. And in the cases in which it's kind of weaker, like the Epstein didn't kill himself was kind of one of the weak ones, but there's not a lot of data there, and so it's hard to know if there's actually a genuine difference. So it's hard to say, but it seems to be pretty true across a large category of them.
But what about the kind of centrality of the conspiracy theory to people's kind of belief systems or identity? And same with, I think the question is for the Trump studies, kind of the strength of their socio-political identity.
Yeah. So in the we asked people in the conspiracy experiment how central is this conspiracy to your worldview and something I can't remember exact
Yeah.
wording, and that moderates the effect to some extent. So it's weaker for people that it's just more important for identity, but it's still the effect is present even for the people who say extremely important to my personal identity. Uh, for the Trump stuff, that's all brand new, and I don't have an answer to that question. But yeah, we should look at that.
Do you have any plans on looking at how these changes in degree of belief about conspiracies or political topics are reflected in actual behavior relevant to those topics? Voting intentions, vaccination, or any other relevant behaviors?
Yeah, it's hard because I mean, obviously those are just naturally harder to do. We want to do field experiments, like ones where people in the world. So, like for example, you might put up an ad on like conspiracy websites, and then people can click on it and come to the thing, and but you still have selection,
Yeah.
but it's still the people from the actual world that are doing it. In that case, it's not obvious how we would track the actual outcomes. We were going to try to do a field experiment with a popular uh, organization that does vaccinations, and then it didn't work out because of lawyers dragging their feet. So these are hard things to do.
Yeah.
We would love to do it, but
Well,
we have when some of these days we have like kind of lame versions of that. We have like intentions to vaccinate, all that kind of stuff. But you know,
okay, another question. I was impressed, but also a little bit puzzled about these results with the rude AI. I wonder, would this replicate in a face-to-face conversation? Since political views are now more extreme and further spread apart than ever, not really a question, I guess. I'm just wondering what to take away from this for non-chatbot situations.
I mean the issue is that uh, we're a scenario where the person completes the study to get paid. Uh, if there was a scenario in which it was a face-to-face conversation, maybe with like just an RA, and they were being rude in that sort of way, and they were providing good arguments, then it maybe would be fine. I mean, there would be some additional factors involved with like increased emotionality because we take a lot out of the way that someone's looking, like interpersonal interaction is a huge has an impact on our kind of like moods and all, and impact our thinking. So I don't really know for sure, but the other issue is that like if you translate this to I'm giving my uncle at Thanksgiving all of these facts, but I'm being a jerk and he's not listening to me. Well, I mean, that's not, it's just, there's a lot more going on there that is not related to this. So, but in the scenario where you can give people facts, uh, the facts work surprisingly well. I mean, if in this case, I'm assuming that if you were being rude to people and we had a bot that, like, say we did the ads and people came in from websites and the first thing the bot said was something rude, people would just leave. So then it's not going to work because they're not doing it. So like, but in the context where people are actually doing it, the rudeness doesn't stop them from updating their views.
Cool. Just off the top of your head, do you know if age had any effect on conspiratorial beliefs or if they were more or less likely to change their mind?
Uh, no, but I'm pretty sure not. I'm pretty sure, but I'm not sure. Like
Okay.
I don't know for sure, but looking at like a wide range of moderators, we did a kind of like um causal tree thing where you throw everything in and see what actually is predicting things. And I don't remember age being something that was of consequence. But our ranges are one of the issues is that if you look at age on these sorts of uh opt-in samples, the older people who are doing surveys are different than older people who are not doing surveys to a greater extent than young people.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't come to strong conclusions about that.
Just a note from Steve Lewandowski. He says the rudeness results are not entirely unexpected. Philip Schmid has shown similar effects in the context of vaccine hesitancy, not using LLMs, but interventions that were either rude or polite.
Yeah, in cases
So,
in which the fact check itself is rude. We kind of thought that it would be different when it was in the context of this sort of like back and forth. Uh, and like in that it was like such an express like I think in this source, I guess the other way to think about it is that because they thought it was a Democrat bot and we added in the element of it being rude, it was kind of plausible that it actually was a Democrat bot and they had reason to think that it was motivated. And so the kind of combination is what yielded the kind of like surprising conclusion to us. Yeah.
cool. All right. Well, we'll end with one final question. Kind of, what are your thoughts about implementing these techniques? Not necessarily just specifically the chat with an LLM, but the broader set of findings that like evidence matters and presenting people with evidence is useful. Do you have thoughts on kind of what we can do society-wide to kind of implement some of these ideas?
Well, I mean, the one version of implementation is like interventions and stuff, and like we kind of talked about that. But the other thing I think that is important is one element of the kind of narrative about facts don't matter is sort of a finger pointing thing where we say, I mean, no one who says facts don't matter believes that they don't matter to them. They think they don't matter to other people. And that like we do this when we look at someone on the other side of the aisle and we say, well, the only reason they could possibly disagree with me is they must be a moron, or like they don't care about the truth or whatever. And I think that that's not the case. I think that we need to kind of like step that back and realize that probably the biggest kind of like consequence of all this is that if you look at people that are highly diverged in terms of what they believe to be true, and cases where you have lots of evidence where there's systematic differences in misinformation in a political ecosystem, where people on the right in the states are getting far more misinformation in their feeds and from their political elites than people on the left. It's a matter of inequity. Uh, you can't be pointing a finger at like look how dumb they are over there if you're hanging on the left because like you're engaging in different information ecosystems, and I think psychologists have put too much weight on these mechanisms that are important in to some extent, like needs and motivations. These things are important, but if we want to kind of understand the full extent of the problem that we're facing, thinking about it at a systemic level in terms of the information ecosystem and what people are being exposed to seems to explain a lot more of what's going on than blaming people for the choices they're making.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you again for this wonderful presentation. Thank you to all the attendees who stuck around. Reminder that you'll get a survey by email. Definitely pay attention to the website. Look for future talks in the OneWorld Cognitive Psychology Seminar Series. I know we have Dan Simons booked for February to talk about inattentional blindness. There will be some additional ones coming up on the schedule. But yeah, thanks again to Gord and have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, Lisa. Bye, people.